So, good morning, everyone, partners and colleagues, and thank you for making space in your busy schedules to join us for this webinar on the role of distribution utilities in the Philippine energy transition and post-COVID recovery. We see more than 100 participants in this webinar right now, and we could just wait for a few moments to allow other people and participants to come to enter the room. And this webinar is co-presented by the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator and the Philippines National Renewable Energy Board, the National Electrification Administration, and the Philippine Rural Electric Cooperatives Association Incorporated. We know these are challenging times for everyone, so we appreciate that you could all join. I am Marlon Joseph Apanyada, Southeast Asia Engagement Lead for Climate and Energy for the World Resources Institute, or WRI, and I am excited to host today's webinar. As the Philippines moves from emergency response to economic recovery, we are glad to provide this opportunity for distribution utilities, or DUs, electric cooperatives, or ECs, and policymakers to explore how the Philippines can build back better so our energy systems are more resilient to major disruptions and able to provide affordable, modern energy services to communities across the country while addressing long-term sustainability and climate goals. We welcome the 130 plus participants in today's webinar, and we do hope that you could find this morning session insightful, productive, and worthy learning event. I am very thrilled to introduce our speakers who are working towards ensuring that the country is moving towards a more sustainable and resilient power sector. In today's live webinar, we are joined by Attorney Monalisa Dimalanta, Chairperson of the National Renewable Energy Board, who will be giving the welcome remarks to be followed by a presentation from the Department of Energy's Assistant Secretary, Redentor Delola, with a discussion on the status of the Renewable Portfolio Standards, or RPS, and other exciting policies to support sustainable economic recovery. We will also be hearing from the experiences of private distribution utilities, represented by Aboitiz Power, Assistant Vice President for Economics, Mr. Dennis Veralo, and electric cooperatives, represented by Engineer Rene Fahilagutan, General Manager of Romblon Electric Cooperative Inc., or ROMELCO. To cap off the presentations, we will be hearing from engineer artist Nikki Tortola, National Electrification Administration, or NEA, Deputy Administrator for Technical Services, on what they see are the opportunities for distribution utilities to build back better. Next slide, please. This webinar is brought to you by the NREB, NEA, and PHILRECA, alongside the Clean Energy Investment Accelerator, or CEIA. CEIA is an innovative public-private partnership that addresses barriers to scale the deployment of clean energy solutions for commercial and industrial consumers in emerging markets like the Philippines. The CEIA is jointly led by the World Resources Institute, or WRI, Alotro Partners, and the U.S. National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL, and supported by the German and U.S. governments and other donors. Next slide, please. To make the most of our time then, I want to now formally introduce Attorney Monalisa Dimalanta to give the welcome remarks. Attorney Mona is presently the chair of the Philippine National Renewable Energy Board, or NREB. She is also a partner in PJS Law, and until her assumption of office as NREB chair, led the energy group of the firm. Attorney Mona is recognized as market leader in the areas of project development and energy, and a leading practitioner in the Asia Pacific, and has been instrumental in organizing this event. Attorney Mona, I pass the mic to you.
Thank you, Marlon. Good morning. Good morning to our distinguished members of the panel. Good morning, everyone. joining us in this webinar. Magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. This morning, I was asked to give a very brief introduction of why we are here this morning. So today is all about focusing the spotlight on the distribution utilities. So I'd like to, this is a context setting exercise for the next few minutes. So I want us to just think about the distribution utilities that provide us power in our homes. We are most likely all in our homes, or some of us, very few of us, in our offices. But those in our homes, I think one thing we are grateful for during this pandemic is that we still have light, we still have internet, we still have electricity. And sometimes we take it for granted that it's always there, that of course when you click on the switch, the light will always turn on, or the aircon will always blow cold air, and the TV will always show you what you want to see. Your Netflix will always work. But there were times in Philippine history that was not the case. And I think one thing we need to be mindful of is that we need to be thankful for also our distribution utilities that continue on even with this pandemic to provide the services that we need. So this morning, we honor the distribution utilities, we focus on them, we also try to define, or at least in this exercise start defining, how and in what role we see for our utilities as our economy recovers from this crisis. Next slide, please. Part of this context, of course, it would be remiss in my official duties if I don't start with this context. The Philippines has a long history with renewables. Our love affair with renewables actually started in the 1930s with Commonwealth Act 120, establishing the National Power Corporation. And you'll see in the slide before you, all the way to 2007, that obligation has primarily been on the shoulders of the National Power Corporation. Now, how do we connect this to, you said we would be talking about distribution utilities today, but why are we focusing on renewables? Because there was a turning point in 2008 when the Republic Act 9513 was passed. That's the Renewable Energy Act. Next slide, please. With the Renewable Energy Act, all of a sudden, well, not really all of a sudden, but I think from putting the renewables journey on the shoulders of the National Power Corporation or the generation companies after EPIRA, I think the Renewable Energy Act put the distribution utilities at the forefront of this challenge to taking us to a green and sustainable future. The distribution utilities are key in achieving the goals of the RE Act because of certain programs that were put in place in the law that put certain obligations on the distribution utilities. Next slide, please. So as I think most of us are aware, there are certain programs under the RE Act focused on on-grid areas and off-grid areas. It's just a snapshot of the programs on the on-grid areas. I think ASICRED will talk more about this later. But I want to, I think, at this point, establish why we are focusing on the DUs. If we want to get on moving forward faster in our journey towards a green and sustainable future, an RE-focused future, we need to, and we cannot ignore our distribution utilities. Next slide, please. The key programs that distribution utilities have to be involved in or are involved in under the RE Act are in front of you on this slide. The Renewable Portfolio Standard, which sets a minimum percentage of generation that needs to be sourced from RE sources, both in the grid and on-grid and off-grid areas. In the on-grid areas, it's currently set at 1% of electricity sales above the FIT allocation. The RE Act also mandates the net metering program. This has been in place already. Currently, as of May, at least the numbers as of May, we already have more than 3,500 registered participants among the DUs. But I think we can do better than this, and that's that's part of the conversation we need to have this morning. How do we get these numbers up? Even for RPS, 2020, when we started out, actually towards the end of last year, we're very excited for what 2020 has to offer for RE, because this is the year finally when all the RE Act mandated programs are going to be implemented, are in place. Imagine that 10 years from when the act was passed, we're finally getting everything going. But of course, life has other plans for us when the pandemic happened. So it doesn't, I think, it doesn't really dishearten us. It definitely makes it more challenging, but I think everybody's up for that challenge. Next slide, please. The other programs under the RE Act would be in support of, well, the first one is in support of RPS, the establishment of the RE market. That's already established as well. One challenge that we are facing is on the registration of participants. And this is where I think a forum such as this is quite helpful, because we need to rally the troops, so to speak, to register in the RE market so that we can get these programs going. The other piece of the puzzle is on the voluntary market. That's the Green Energy Option Program. That's also kicking off this year with allowing the registration of the RE suppliers under the DOE Department Circular that lays down the requirement for getting an operating permit for all those who are interested to supply customers with a monthly average peak demand of 100 kilowatts. So these are the programs these are the programs mandated by the RE Act. There are also, of course, corollary programs to this. I think it was already mentioned in the news as well that the Secretary Cusi had already signed the Department Circular on the Green Energy Auction Program. So that's another enabler program that we are looking forward to be implemented in support of all of these programs. Next slide, please. So without delaying further what we are here for, let me focus on the challenge upon us. Next slide, please. This is what's before us. Over the years, the share of renewable energy in our energy mix, in our supply mix, has been consistently going down. So when the RE Act was passed, it was already at more than 35%. 10 years after the RE Act was passed, it was down to a little over 20%. So how do we get it at least back to pre-RE Act levels at 35? That's the target RE share under the National Renewable Energy Plan, the original one. So how do we get it back to those levels given this pandemic situation? It's like a telenovela where all the villains are upon us and making it very hard for the bida to be successful in his or her goals. But I think this is something that we're all up for. I think we're all in this for the long haul. We will find solutions, and we have people here with us this morning who will help us find our way to get back to the levels that we want for a sustainable future for all of us. So without further delay, I think we can start our conversation going for this morning. Thank you, Marlon. Thank you, everyone. Excited with all of you to listen to our speakers. Salamat.
Thank you so much, Attorney Mona. And as Attorney Mona mentioned, we need to find our way. And for us to find our way, we would like to make the most out of this webinar by making it as an interactive platform as possible. And we will do that through polling questions. I think this is the first time in this pandemic that we were able to gather 170 plus distribution utility representatives, which is a great number. And so on your screen, you could see polling questions. Please, we hope that you could answer these. The first question would be on what kind of institution do you represent? The second question is for DUs and ECs. Select the two greatest challenges related to COVID. And Number three, do you project electricity demand will normalize in the next 6 months based on your honest assessment? We would like this kind of data points because it is rather challenging for us to have like in-person convenings, and at least through these polls we would be able to have at least some insights on what everybody thinks, especially we are now can only virtually meet. So we would appreciate your inputs to these polling questions. While you are answering that, I will be introducing our next speaker. Our next speaker is no less than Delola, Engineer Redentor Estribillo Delola, commonly known as Red. And he is currently the Supervising Assistant Secretary for the Electric Power Industry Management Bureau, or Power Bureau, of the Department of Energy. For the past 3 years, ASEC Red continues to lead the Power Bureau through the formulation of policies, plans, and programs related to generation, transmission, distribution, and supply of electricity, and ensuring its effective implementation. ASEC Red was also designated as the chairman of the Renewable Portfolio Standards, or RPS, composite team to spearhead and monitor the implementation of the rules and guidelines for the RPS, both for on-grid and off-grid, and ensure that DUs and ECs develop indigenous and environmentally friendly energy sources and contribute to the growth of the RE industry. ASEC Red, you have the virtual floor.
Thank you very much, Marlon. Good morning to the officials of CEIA, its partners, to the chairman of National Renewable Energy Board, Atty. Mona, to my co-panelists this morning, especially to all the participants in today's virtual discussions. Good morning to everyone. Maayong buntag sa tanan. Well, allow me to present. This is just a very brief presentation on what the role is of the distribution utilities as we transition towards our recovery and the new normal amidst the pandemic that we're experiencing. The presentation will not just look into what we need to do. It will start basically with showing you what happened from the start of the quarantine implementation up to the present, and what are we looking at as we venture towards the end of the year, and as we face the challenge of not just recovering but actually building back from what we've lost along the way. So next slide, please. So this part will show you what happened to the grids, no? Basically Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao during the pandemic or during the implementation of the quarantine. Next slide, please. Just briefly, we'll go through what happened in Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. In Luzon, demand basically dropped at around 30% during the initial stages of quarantine, and we had the ECQ. Upon lifting of the ECQ, as we slowly open up the economy, Luzon gradually improved. However, we're still below the target, or even below the actual numbers that we've experienced last year. The orange line that you're seeing is the actual demand of 2020. And that broken orange line on top is supposed to be our projected demand for the year. So as you can see, even the yellow line, which is the actual figures of 2019, we weren't able to hit it. And then there's a broken black line, that a dash line that you can see. This is what we project to happen towards the rest of the year. Towards the rest of the year, we will only be approximating the numbers that we had last year. So we don't expect to have any growth for the year. But as we slowly open up and as we slowly transition to the new normal, we're seeing that we will go back to the figures of 2019. Hopefully, towards the end of the year, we'll start to really kick up and start to really have a full recovery of the economy, and hopefully we can, by the first half of next year, as we move towards the entire year of 2021, hopefully we'll be able to fully recover. Next slide, please. So within the entire duration of the ECQ, and as we opened up towards GCQ and now MGCQ in most areas in Luzon, this has been the experience, no, that we had. So right now, we're already very close to the 2019 figures in terms of demand. So hopefully we can sustain this, and hopefully we can improve further as we ease up, no, more and more the restrictions that we're having now. The next slide shows us what happened in Visayas. So in Visayas, it's an average demand reduction of around 19%. Visayas has seen a rather slower recovery because the major economic area in Visayas is now still under MECQ. So that's Cebu City. So without the demand, or without the economic movement in Cebu City, we're still seeing that the demand in Visayas really has a long way to go, no, to be able to even approximate the levels of 2019. Just zooming in to the months when we had the ECQ towards the MECQ. Next slide, please. So that's how it looks like, no, when we look at Visayas. So we're still really lagging in terms of demand. The next slide will show us the movement in Mindanao. Next slide, please. So in Mindanao, there's an average demand reduction of 20%. But Mindanao has shown a rather aggressive recovery than most areas in the Philippines. So as we zoom in, next slide, please. We can see in Mindanao, we're already approximating the demands of 2019. Even our revised projection has already been breached by Mindanao. So Mindanao has shown us that it has recovered faster than the rest of the country. However, we're still seeing a lot of challenges, especially on the distribution level, because if we talk to distribution utilities in Mindanao, we're still really facing a lot of challenges in terms of demand reduction and coping up with what we've lost during the position of the quarantine. In terms of demand, in terms of economic movement, and of course, as we host now the returnees, as we say, during this time, we've also implemented the Balik Probinsya program, and most of the returnees are returning back to Visayas and Mindanao, from the national capital region. So these are challenges that we need to face as we slowly open up the economy, and as we welcome our kababayans going back home. We need to provide for opportunities for them, not just for electric connection, electrification, but as well as opportunities for livelihood through electrification programs. So the next slide will discuss to us the total RE generation of the country, comparing 2019 figures to 2020 year to date, or the first 3 months of the year. 2020 has seen a slight growth, although it's really not substantial, but we've seen growth in our RE generation. But the challenge in front of us is really to as discussed by Attorney Mona earlier, it's really to reach the target of 35%, and we're still a very long way from that target. And in fact, one of the things that we're studying right now is to revisit some of the policies that we've already promulgated, the RPS rules, as it really drives the utilization of RE facilities. So we're trying to review if the 1% increment is still will still be able to help us reach our target, or we may need to revisit it and probably increase it a little bit so that we'll be able to reach our targets. Next slide, please. So what are the mitigation measures that us as distribution utilities can do in terms of recovering from this pandemic and making sure that we're still able to provide reliable, affordable service to our consumers, to our member consumer owners for our electric cooperatives. Next slide, please. So the target really that is set before us is to increase the share of RE in the generation mix. So what we can do as distribution utilities is to integrate, and then really religiously look into our RPS requirements and integrate them into our distribution development plan. Be able to really plan out and forecast how we'll be able to comply with the requirements of RPS as we go towards securing PSAs or power supply agreements with the RE facilities. We are in the forefront. The distribution utilities are at the very forefront of this battle, because the RE or the distribution utilities are tasked by the law itself to procure the supply for their captive market. So we are at the forefront of really complying, and not just complying, but really satisfy the objectives of the laws and the policies that we're trying to implement. Two of the things that we can really drive further and support is the net metering program and the green energy option program. This is a way for us to be able to not just comply with the RPS requirements, but this is a way for us to really do our share as we build a more resilient and more reliable system. As we supply the requirements and the needs of our consumers. But along with this comes a challenge for all of us, because net metering agreements, green energy option agreements or contracts mean that this will be a reduction to the demand that we're taking from the supply contracts that we've already signed. So there's a huge challenge in really balancing the welfare of our consumers and the welfare of the organizations. So we need to invest more in metering equipment for RE facilities, not just under the net metering program, but really moving towards having a more robust and smart system. Because as we've seen in the hearings these past few weeks, it really focused more on the veracity and the reliability of the bills that the consumers are receiving. So that's really a huge issue. It's a really a huge concern that everybody's facing. So building a smarter and a more robust or more technology and information and data-driven system will allow us to answer to these challenges as well. So of course, facilitate timely conduct of competitive selection process in compliance to RPS rules, because the DUs are really the mandated participants in this program. Next slide, please. So just briefly discuss, because Attorney Mona already covered some of these policies. Um, I would like to highlight the first policy, which is providing a national smart grid policy framework for the Philippines, because this will allow us not just to have a smarter and a more data-driven system, but it also allows us to accommodate more RE in the system, accommodate more prosumers as our consumers. Whether we like it or not, our consumers will gradually become prosumers in the future. So we have to be able to manage all of these injections in our system. So the policy for the National Smart Grid framework will help us as we face these challenges. We've helped our host communities with the rationalization of the Era 194 funds. We've issued COVID-19 response protocols, and the very important policies that we've already promulgated are RPS rules for on-grid and off-grid. We have the Green Energy Option Program. Now we're having policy discussions on the bidding out of RE contracts, no? As we have our third OXP, which will be conducted this year with a potential of 495 megawatts of RE capacity. And just recently, the Secretary signed, and it's now subject for publication, the promulgating the rules and guidelines governing the Green Energy Tariff Program. So this will allow us to auction large capacities of RE to come into our system to be able, for us to be able to comply with RPS requirements of the mandated participants in our distribution utilities. Next slide, please. So I think I don't have much time, so I'll just go quickly to these new normal actions. The agency is closely monitoring, and we're really in collaboration with all of our stakeholders as we transition towards the new normal, and as we resume the projects that has been suspended and delayed because of the pandemic. Now, we've also required our distribution utilities to prepare and to implement their business continuity plans, among all other policy issuances that the department has issued. So to close, next slide, please. Again, next slide, please. Our distribution utilities plays a very vital role, and we are the major players here as we're tasked to provide critical infrastructure for us to be able to respond to many foreseeable hazards, and not just now we're faced by a new a new challenge. For the longest time, we're facing challenges of typhoon, earthquake. Now, a pandemic is a totally new and new challenge that all of us really haven't really prepared for. The delivery of service must remain dependable and consistent, even if there's a health emergency, which really limits the number of employees and contractors that are able to work. We usually follow our business continuity plans and update them if needed, and we really commend NEA, PHILRECA, as they're at the forefront of this long tradition of resource sharing and mutual assistance within the electric cooperatives. Our task force kapatid, they implemented the Pantawid Liwanag program, which is really commendable. As a way forward, as COVID-19 continues to be a health emergency, distribution utilities may need to expand efforts to keep the workforce safe and have necessary skills in place at all times, while ensuring reliable, dependable, affordable electricity supply for the Filipino people. In terms of really what was asked of us to present, the status of the RPS compliance or the RPS program, we will discuss that. I think we'll be able to discuss that more in detail during the discussions. We'll be able to shed light on the status of the program and what's in store for us, no, as we implement it, and as we implement further a lot of the policies to finally satisfy or to finally comply with the objectives of the RE. So with that, again, thank you very much to the organizers of this event, to my fellow panelists. Good morning to all of us. Thank you for having me here. David, thank you for having the Department of Energy, and we look forward to even more collaborations with all of you in the future. Good morning.
Okay, daghang salamat, ASEC Red, for your very insightful presentation. A lot of the information is exactly the type of cutting-edge insight that a webinar like this hopes to cascade to such an important stakeholder group as DUs and ECs. No, it is great to hear that the DOE is very much pushing for renewable energy. Despite the COVID pandemic, as we've learned from previous webinars, especially the one that we had in June 15th with the ERC and the DOE and NREB, RE is fast, clean, and cheap, and provides flexible solutions to our power worries. At this juncture, we would like to see the results of the poll earlier. Gabriel, can you flash the results? We see that a majority of our participants are indeed distribution utility or electric cooperatives. And for DUs and ECs, the two greatest challenges that they see related to COVID are on reduced revenue from unpaid bills and slowdown in projects being developed. Although others have also cited a drop in demand during quarantine and a shift in demand profile. And I think this shift in demand profile that serves as an impetus for the national smart grid policy to be really accelerated to address this challenge. And do you see there's an interesting mix? It's almost 50-50 in terms of perception on whether the electricity demand will normalize in the next 6 months. Of course, no one has a crystal ball, but at least we have a bigger share of our audience that are slightly more optimistic about the return to normalcy in the next 6 months. So with this, we really hope that you would pop in your questions in the Q&A chat box, because we do not have a lot of opportunities for NEA, PHILRECA, NREB, and DOE to be in the same room alongside the leading energy experts in the Philippines. So let's take this opportunity and let our questions be heard, and make this a webinar as productive and informative for everyone as possible. We will hear more from our next set of speakers on how COVID has affected them and the solutions they are looking into as the country shifts to this new normal. But before we proceed, we would like to know how the EC and DUs are doing in response to the RPS mandates set by the DOE. So we have a new set of polling questions. For ECs and DUs, please answer the poll on RPS awareness and preparedness, which should now have popped up on your screens. So first question for DU EC participants, are you aware of your RPS requirements? Second, are you starting to take steps to ensure your RPS compliance? And are you interested in developing your own RE projects? So please answer the poll questions on your screens. We will, next slide please. We will share the results of the poll before the panel discussion later in the program. And with that, let us proceed with our next speaker, Mr. Dennis Viralio, the Assistant Vice President for Utility Economics at Aboitiz Power, which manages the second largest private distribution utility in the Philippines. Mr. Viralio is in charge of power contracting of distribution utilities under Aboitiz Power. including the conduct of CSP, and ensures their compliance to regulatory requirements. Mr. Veralio also oversees the day-to-day WESM trading operations of their distribution utilities. Welcome, Mr. Veralio, to this virtual webinar.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, good morning. So before I start, let me just go through the DUs, distribution utilities under our umbrella. We have Delola, we have Design Electric, that's in Cebu City, right? And we have Cotabato Light, we have Mactan Energy Zone, we have Subic Energy Zone, we have Balamban Energy, and we have Lima Energy Zone in Malbar, and we also have here is the Malbar. Next slide. So this is our, let me our composed of renewable and non-renewable supply. In Davao, we are 57% of supply from renewable. And however, only 7% of that from another eligible plant. In terms of net green customers, we have 78 and around 1 megawatt capacity. 59% of that is non-renewable, 41% is renewable. However, none of it comes from an RPS eligible plants. In terms of net metering, we have 128 number of net metering customers and around 1.7 net metering capacity. In terms of installed capacity above net metering, we are about 5 megawatts. We're just showing these numbers to you because just to illustrate that we have been an advocate of, or not really an advocate, but we have been contracting from an RE supply since the very beginning. And while there are consequences to it, most of the RE contracts that we have are not as cheap versus other conventional supply. And we feel that it would be very difficult for us to implement or comply with the RPS requirement if it was earlier implemented, or if it was implemented prior to some of the expiration of these contracts. Next slide. So from our RE experience and power contracting overall, we have 3 areas where we look at. First one is flexibility. Second one is consistency. And the other one is compliance. Flexibility allows us to manage our cost by playing around our contracts. Contracts that has minimum offtakes, contract that has minimum demands, and by playing around with our supply from WESA, from all these contracts, it minimizes our cost. You know? And however, when we contracted for our supply in the past, those contracts are very flexible. It has to be taken 24/7. But as we heard later, we have the capacity more flexible. In terms of consistency, one of the aspects where we compare in terms of RE supply is intermittency. It's a problem for us. Right? So sometimes because if the RE facility is not available, we'll be forced to buy from the market or from other sources, which might be more expensive than a fixed supply contract. And in Mindanao, where there is no WASM, it has sometimes led to power outages, especially during seasons where water is not that abundant. Then we have experienced continued problems with compliance. We all know that there's an increasing penetration of solar or embedded RE, mostly solar, and it poses a challenge of stakeholder compliance, right? We've observed people putting up rooftop solars without COCs, without a DIS, especially if it's a very big installation. And well, the last thing that for as a DU, the last thing that we would want is disconnect people, because again, it's against our mandate to provide electricity at the most reliable um, possible venue. So I think that's something that as an industry we have to look into, right? Not just the owners who put up solar, but maybe also the vendors who put up those who sells or installs these installations, right? Next slide, please. Okay, so this is our projected RPS requirement. You will notice a slight decrease with COVID. Not that much, but I think what will really affect this one also is when the K sub O is changed, or when there is subscription to the FIT for biomass and hydro. So 2024 might be pushed towards 2025. It could be earlier depending on the policy of the DOE and the subscription of the FIT. But as a way forward for distribution utilities, what we can really do to be able to help and achieve compliance to RPS and all these renewable energy policies is that to account the RECs from solar installations, rooftop solar installation within our franchise area, and maybe create a standard for meter, control and monitoring of these RE installations. And I think that's what DOE is, as Redentor Delola said. That's one of the policy that the DOE is trying to craft right now, and I hope it gets support all the way to other regulatory bodies as well. And for contracting, the decision that we have to make now is either for a short-term bridge or to contract for an RE today, since we have our compliance years in 2024 or 2025. So that has to be a decision that we should be making soon. But again, that's pending all the policies that has to be crafted. No? Well, an option for compliance of RPS after is the obvious one is to contract for an RE supply, to join the green energy auction program, or buy RECs from the REM, whichever is least costly for our customers. Next slide, please. Now, we all know that policy and regulation dictates the energy landscape, whether RE or not. But from the DU's perspective, I think we need better understanding of the price caps for the renewable energy certificates. I think we also need to know what the pass-through mechanisms are. I think that's very important. And for the green energy tariff program, should be able to understand this more deeply so that we can evaluate the cost options and the risk associated to it. And we would like also a more involvement in the creation of terms of reference for the auction program, so that we can validate or assess the risk and the rewards of joining the auction program. Then for the energy policies, especially for compliance of RPS and RE in general, I think, or we feel that these are part of a whole. So it's not a standalone policy, but it's part of a whole general overall policy which will support the contracting direction of the DUs. Because as we all know, we're not just contracting for RPS compliance, but we're contracting also for demand, and that may include non-RE plants. Right? So we feel that the RE policies are in support of the total overall contracting direction of the distribution utilities. Now, there must also be a balance between, lastly, there must also be a balance between an alignment of these policies and regulations. As we all know, these policies and creation doesn't only affect the customer, it affects the DU, it affects the supply side. And I think that it affects the vendors as well, no? For smaller RE installations. So I think there should be a balance of not just protecting one sector, but protecting all sectors if possible, or maybe come up with a win-win solution. I think most of the I've seen some of the questions raised, and most of them are really apprehensions, no, of what will happen to if this scenario happens. What will we do with a customer who doesn't really secure a COC? What will happen to started contracts? What will happen to our assets? I think there should be balance in managing all of those, and I think that will come from a policy which the DOE or the ERC or the NREB will create. And I guess this is the last slide for me. Thank you for letting us share our insights on the landscape of RE and how we comply with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Veralo. And I think we will revisit a few points of your slides in the open forum later. But thanks to Aboitiz Power in tackling the current COVID situation and sharing its plans during the country's recovery phase. I see a few questions in the Q&A box, and we will revisit them in the open forum. But up next, let's hear from the experience of electric cooperatives. So for our next presentation, we have Engineer Rene M. Fahilagutan, General Manager of Romblon Electric Cooperative and President of the Association of Isolated Electric Cooperatives. He is a longtime and staunch advocate of clean and renewable energy and has been providing electric cooperatives with case examples that resilient energy is possible through his various pioneering renewable energy projects implemented in Romelco. So with this, I give the floor to Engineer Rene.
Thank you, Marlon, for the nice introduction. To the officials of CEIA, our chairperson of the NREB, Atty. Mona, to our ASEC of the Department of Energy, Red Delola, to our Deputy Administrator, Nikki Tortola of the National Electrification Administration, and to all electric cooperatives and participants in this particular webinar, good morning. For many years, the electric cooperatives have weathered numerous calamities and disasters, both natural and man-made, like the super typhoons, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, insurrections, and many other disasters that struck our communities. However, in a few days, immediately after these calamities, electric cooperatives are back on their feet and providing necessary services to our member consumer owners. Likewise, in so many instances, after the onslaught of the devastating calamities that struck our particular communities, Task Force Kapatid can be counted on by the distressed electric cooperatives to help them rebuild their system and restore normal operation in a few weeks or months. However, this silent catastrophe, the COVID-19 pandemic, is extremely different. It is unusual. It has spared no one. Widespread economic damage, not only in our respective communities, but to the entire nations and even the world, have severely affected the financial operation of the individual electric cooperatives. Experts are predicting that the prolonged recovery of the economy is very dependent to the availability of vaccines. For these reasons, there's a need that all economic projections and plans of the electric cooperatives should be reset. or have to adapt to new tools and strategies to stay in business and continuously support the delivery of electric service to our member consumer owners and support the economic recovery of the nations. Today, I will present to you the snap picture on how the pandemic has affected the electric cooperatives in the Philippines. Next slide. Okay, so how does the electric cooperatives perform under the environment of ECQ and GCQ that was declared by the national government on March 16? So this slide will show to you how the lockdowns and closure of businesses and loss of jobs affect the electric cooperatives in providing electric service in this respective franchise area. So this chart is the representation of a typical representation of the electric cooperatives. So for the main grid electric cooperatives, the reduction of sales is very significant in April and May. So this is during the quarantine period. The same thing with the off-grid electric cooperatives. Almost the same drop in sales, which is from 4.6 for the main grid, 4.6% to for the month of March compared to the pre-pandemic period, and 43% on the for the month of April, and 62% for the month of May. So this is a very significant reduction of sales, which is really affects the financial and financial operation of the electric cooperatives. So remember that the electric cooperatives have a target for their what we call the revenue requirements. So if your sales will drop significantly, this percentage, so you can even hardly pay your power suppliers, which accounts already for between 55 to 67 or 68% of your total cost of operation. So that is very damaging to the operation. So how this affect the electric cooperatives? Next slide. So number one is it affects our cash flow. So it's really a big headache for us. This is the cash flow problem was experienced immediately on the after the declaration of the ECQ and GCQ on March 17. So for that, the electric cooperatives have deferred their electrification projects and the cancellation or suspension of their capital projects. So both of these electrification program have been suspended by the electric cooperatives. So the electrification target for the year is now compromised. So we might not met the target of the electric cooperatives and the National Electrification Administration on the numbers of households to be energized. Since the closures of the ports, the factories, so the materials and are being the transport of materials and mobilization of manpower is really a challenge for this. So the cash flow problem also delayed, or the O&M expenses for the system maintenance and upgrading. So this might affect our reliability in operation and efficiency, because of the non-upgrading of the system. Also, we encountered the difficulty on the payments of our financial obligations to lending institutions and suppliers. So due to the limited cash flow, some of our electric cooperatives have encountered to meet the financial obligations. luckily, some of the electric power suppliers, have implemented the staggered payments on their on the power bills of the electric cooperatives. Since we can hardly implement our disconnection and collection policies. So with that, we're able to have a temporary relief, in the to resolve our cash flow problem. So delayed payments of employees' benefits also affected our the operation of the cooperative. So sometimes some electric cooperatives experience the demoralization of the employees, due to the suspension of some benefits, So that is another problem that we have encountered. So on the next slide, so the impact of the energy consumptions and projections vis-a-vis our power supply agreement, So we also this is also a problem, because of the reduced demand and the consumption has resulted to the increase of the energy rates of our MCOs. Our electric cooperatives have individual power supply agreements. Some features of the PSA are the contracted demand and the minimum energy offtake. So for those electric cooperatives with large consumers of industrial and commercial and other big loads, have severely affected their contracts, power supply contracts. So because in the contracts, there are provisions there, especially on the energy offtake, that those are sometimes it is graduated. At certain percentage, at let's say 60%, the cost is a little bit higher compared to the 90 or 80% of your contract is being consumed. Much more when you not able to meet the contracted capacity, so you have to still have to pay that amount. So it will really affect the energy cost of the electric cooperatives to their electric consumers. So the hardest part here is that the consumers will ultimately shoulder the cost. So that's the effect to our rates. So closure of business and some industries will affect also the consumption. So the electricity business is directly related to the economy of the community that it serves. So it goes that the slump of the economy will directly affect the energy consumption of the consumers and would reflect to the energy and demand requirements of the electric cooperatives. So that's really another factor that affect the operation of the electric cooperatives. So for the contract demand and energy, it should be reviewed and to renegotiate with the power suppliers. So we know that the present landscape, in the power industry, considering that there are so many factories or so many workers that have job anymore, so it will really affect our projections and our contracts with our power suppliers. So we are going to see to it that we can effectively renegotiate the contracts so that our rate will not significantly increase. So with all these learnings that we have been through under these very unusual circumstances in our operation as an electric cooperative, we need to rethink our way of doing business in serving our member consumer owners. So I'd like to pose these questions. So is our present model of power supply procurement and power supply agreements serves well our member consumer owners, in which most of the terms favors the other parties? Based on the experience of some electric cooperatives, renegotiations on the provisions of the PSA, particularly on the minimum energy offtake and the capacity fee, capacity contract, we have experienced a very tough negotiations. So especially the provisions of, as I've said, of the MIUT, only a handful of the electric consumers or electric cooperatives have successfully renegotiated. So their rates was not severely affected, but most of the electric cooperatives wasn't able to negotiate successfully with their power suppliers. So effectively, the rate of their consumers have increased in this particular period. Second, are we going to remain too dependent to our present power suppliers? Or are we going to develop our own embedded generation facilities, especially the renewable energy resources, so we can have more control on its operation, particularly on its rate, or avoid power outages caused by transmission congestions? You know, sometimes the facilities are being overtaken by the growth of the electricity demand. No? So medyo mabagal yung ating improvement of the facilities, especially in the transmissions. And lastly, if virtual meetings can allow us gather in this kind of forum without anyone being in the large conference venue, can we also have a remotely distributed solar power plants and batteries in our franchise area be installed? So these are some of the few questions that we need to ponder on how to improve our operations and become less vulnerable to the economic disruptions brought by such kind of calamities like COVID-19 pandemic to serve better our member consumers. So that's all for today, and thank you. Back to you, Marlon.
Right. Thank you, GM Rene. Very interesting questions, and noted on 3 questions. Number 1 is the paradigm and processes and provisions of the current contracts really serving the consumers well, given what we've seen in the pandemic, and are we going to be too dependent on power suppliers? And then how do we make ourselves less vulnerable to economic shocks brought by this COVID pandemic? We note those questions, and we are seeing a lot of interesting questions, and these are the kinds of questions that we are also asking ourselves. So we're really eager to have our open forum and our interactive dialogue. But before that, would like to introduce our final speaker. Last but definitely not the least, engineer artist Nikki Tortola, Deputy Administrator for Technical Services at the National Electrification Administration, for his presentation on the challenges and opportunities for ECs to build back better. Engineer Nikki, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I hope that everyone is safe. Before I start, I would like to introduce my agency. NEA is actually supervising 121 electric cooperatives all over the country, from the northernmost portion of the country, which is Batanes, to the southernmost portion of the country, which is Tawi-Tawi. The agency also monitors the operation of the ECs, and at the same time, the partner of the national government together with the electric cooperatives in the implementation of total electrification and rural development in the countryside. To start with, next. Actually, the EC has truly been affected by the pandemic in all aspects. Among others, as what was pointed by GM Rene kanina a while ago, that there is truly a decline in the economic activity of the franchise area of the cooperative, especially those with commercial, industrial, and ECs with high tourism areas. This actually resulted to the reduction in the energy consumption Based on the May 2020 data, the initial review of the sales of the electric cooperatives, about 5% reduction compared to the May 2020. 2019 was registered. Power reliability in some areas were also affected by the pandemic. One issue is that due to the lockdowns, due to the ECQ, especially during the start of the ECQ, some of the areas of the electric cooperatives, some of the municipality of the electric cooperatives actually has a very stringent entry of people on the municipality, which in turn forced the electric cooperative to do reactive maintenance in their system. This implies that during the March period, April, and mid of May, the vegetation of the electric cooperatives are growing on some areas of which they cannot penetrate because of the stringent entry on that area, and the disallowance of contractors to enter on that area. As what was pointed also by GM Rene a while ago, that their meter reading, billing, and collection was heavily affected during the crisis. Next slide. The pandemic also resulted to the delayed implementation of some critical projects. It's not some, most of the critical projects of the electric cooperatives, including the SEP projects. One major reason of it is actually the manpower availability, which is hampered due to the lockdown. Also, the procurement of materials were affected since some of the sources of the country of the materials were also affected by the pandemic. The prices of some of the materials, if not majority of the materials, also escalated due to storage and delivery. In some areas, transportation was also hampered, which caused inland transportation of materials were delayed during the ECQ. Also, because of the COVID-19, some of the SEP funds by the government were actually reverted back to the national governments for the COVID-19 pandemic. Next. But as mentioned a while ago, one of the operational challenges of the electric cooperatives is the restoration of the system. Aside from that, is the health risk of the personnel doing the operation and maintenance in their respective franchise area, including the personnel facing the customers on a day-to-day basis. Local permitting and local and national permitting and application approval was also a challenge for the electric cooperative, especially during the start of the shutdown. However, the shift on online transaction has slowly improved follow-ups and monitoring of the ECs in their transaction, both on local and national. The high rates due to demand reduction and unutilized contracted capacity was also experienced by the electric cooperatives. However, The pandemic also opened up opportunities for the ECs, among other, the following. The ECs are further improving in their distribution system, thus reducing downtime. The pandemic also allowed the ECs to look more further on the potential technologies within their franchise area. With the pandemic happening, the ECs are gearing for embedded renewable energy, which could eventually be a demand augmentation plant, intermediate, or just plainly a rate stabilizing power plant, which could in turn make sure that their member consumers will be able to access clean and cheap electricity. The ECs also further strengthen its IT infrastructure to make way for automated system, web-based transaction, among others, which would eventually improve the system reliability and customer service. Although one of the greatest opportunity of the electric cooperative is the brotherhood among ECs, which was made stronger by the pandemic. Their unity was further making sure that every ECs in particular and the member consumers in general survive this crisis. I believe that's the last of my slide. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you very much, Engineer Tortola. And we appreciate your time today, and we look forward to your insights as we open the 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 interactive dialogue in a few minutes. As we prepare for the question and answer session, we would just like to quickly show the results of the previous poll. Um, and for those who have already started or are looking into developing RE plants, as in response to what Engineer GM Rene mentioned about increasing, the ability of ECs to secure their own supply and dictate the terms of their energy supply, we would like to hear more from you after the webinar regarding the challenges you have faced and how we could help you. So for many, there's an overwhelming awareness on the RPS requirements. So thanks to the DOE and NREB for your continued awareness raising and information education campaigns for this particular policy. And we see that for many DU and EC participants, they're already starting to take steps to ensure RPS compliance. And most of them are actually interested in developing their own RE projects. This is very interesting, and that presents a lot of opportunities as well as expected challenges down the road. And the CEIA is here to help you out realize these goals. So with that, we would like to welcome again to the virtual stage our speakers and panelists, Attorney Mona, ASEC Red, Mr. Varallo, GM Rene, and Engineer Tortola. And also joining us on stage is Ms. Sarah Jane Ahmed, Energy Finance Analyst at the Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis, or IEFA. As you may be reading from various publications and reports, Sarah's name always pops up as she's one of the leading energy experts and energy transition experts in the country today. IEFA conducts research and analysis on financial and economic issues related to energy and the environment, and has been closely monitoring and studying the development of the Philippine energy market. Welcome, Sarah, to the webinar. So, without further ado, we would like to open this the floor to questions, and we would like to hear at least from Attorney Mona any opening thoughts as we open this panel discussion on what we would like to address, and given the presentations beforehand, any opening statements, Attorney Mona?
No, I think I just want to thank our panelists for today. Those were very, you're absolutely correct, Marlon. They were very insightful presentations. I definitely learned a lot, especially from the electric cooperatives who are members of PHILRECA with GM Rene, and also as represented by NEA with engineer artists. There are, because I'm based in Metro Manila, so I'm more familiar with, I guess, issues for the urban setting, but this is also an eye opener for me for what's happening, beyond the urban areas and the issues that are faced by our electric cooperatives, no? So I think very helpful. But I think what would be useful for us, because I'm conscious also of the time, there are a lot of very good questions posted in the chat room. So maybe what we can do, it's going to be maybe expectation setting again. It's going to be impossible to cover all the questions, while I was trying to also answer some of the questions in the Q&A log, while I had time, those that I could answer. For example, maybe we can ask the panelists if they can choose one question from the many that they would like to answer. Then we can take it up from there, because there are a lot. And thank you also to our participants, because it shows that our participants are very engaged um, in this webinar, in this discussion. And it is encouraging when participants are engaged, because I know the panelists also spend time in putting together the presentation. So nakakatuwa naman na sinasagot ng interes yung kanilang pinaghirapan din i-prepare for this morning. So maybe I don't know who wants to first choose the question that they would like to answer from the Q&A. Sino ba yung sumunod sa aking nag-present? Si Asek. Maybe we can ask Asek Red to choose the first question that he would like to answer.
Thank you, Attorney Mona. Yeah, it's gonna be very hard for me to choose one question, kasi I think most of the questions are directed towards
The use, that's right. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, directed towards the policymakers and the regulators, no? But I'll try to, I'll just provide a general statement, no, to try to cover most of the questions that have been asked. The RPS rules has been promulgated and implemented in view of really complying with the objectives of the RE Act. And one of the major questions that have always been asked is, will it lead to the increase in rates? So it's very important for us now to go back to the competitive selection process policy that the department has issued, because that's the only way for us to make sure that the procurement has gone through a competitive process. Now, how it impacts DUs who have already contracted its requirement. One of the features of the rules or the policy that we've implemented is that it should not lead to overcontracting or even an increase in the rates. So that's one of the things that we should make sure as we try to implement the RPS or the RPS program. So we go back to the distribution development plan of all the distribution utilities. The power supply procurement plan plays a very major role in looking into how you will be able to comply with the requirements, not just of RPS, as Aboitis mentioned earlier, but the requirements of your demand, of your consumers. Because you have to be able to really find a balance in complying with regulations, in complying with policies, and as well as delivering the services and the requirements of the consumers. So that's what we're looking at. That's why the RPS, the department really created a team, which is actually, I'm in the team, and Attorney Mona is in the team, the Renewable Portfolio Standards composite team, because we have to review this regularly. No? We cannot force the issue of compliance if it leads to overcontracting, if it leads to sudden rate increases. So it's very important for us to really plan out, no, through the power supply procurement plan, how we'll be able to comply with these requirements with expiring contracts coming in. Then it opens up a requirement. How will you able to create that optimal mix? Now that's why I'm saying earlier that the DUs really play a major role, because we are at the forefront of satisfying the requirements of our consumers, as well as complying with regulations and the policies of government, and ensuring that the services are reliable, affordable, no? Stable and secure. Now, on some of the programs that we've implemented, like net metering, it has been raised by some of the participants or some of the consumers that there are barriers to entry. The DUs are also coming up to us that saying that a lot of the consumers don't go through them, just install these facilities without going through the DU. So those are the things that we're currently reviewing. We're working with DTI to standardize these installations. We're working with ERC to really look into, number one, to really promote the program, and second is to allow consumers to be able to participate, and allow the DUs to be able to protect the other consumers that might be affected by the intermittency, by the injection of these facilities in the system. No? So we encourage the DUs to come up with the processes for distribution impact studies that consumers need to go through. There are rules already promulgated by ERC, like the COC rules. Even self-generation facilities need to undergo the process of this as part of the compliance. So I suggest we review the policies and the rules of ERC, because this can be applied as we deal with the influx of these new technologies that are coming in, distributed energy resources, the metering program, green energy option. These are challenges to the DUs, but as well as opportunities for them, because all of the RECs, the renewable energy certificates that will be coming from these facilities, will be turned over to the DU. That will be part of your compliance. So there's really an opportunity for the DU in letting this program be implemented. So I hope with that I've been able to cover some of the questions. This is really very difficult to just pick one question. Thank you.
Oh,
Asset.
okay. What?
Maybe,
Go
Marlon,
ahead, Attorney Mona.
I just wanted to add to the point of ASEC on CSP, because for one of the measures being adopted now to address that CSP compliance is, as mentioned earlier, also included by ASEC in his presentation, is the green energy auction rules. Because for RE, that is the bespoke, if I may say, bespoke CSP process for RE procurement to comply with the RPS requirements. So that was really crafted to assist compliance with the RPS program. So once that's rolled out, I think also with the presentation of ASEC Delola, I think for the first, as we mentioned, this is year one of implementation of RPS. For the first few years, or maybe 1 or 2 years, with the FIT allocation, it's not going to be very difficult for utilities to comply. That's why they are encouraged to participate na tayo habang kaya talaga ng compliance, so that we get used to this program with the RE market. And then moving forward, that's where the auction becomes the main vehicle for compliance, for procuring RE to meet the RPS requirements. Gusto ko lang pong idagdag yun.
And speaking of auctions, Attorney Mona, because I also saw some questions on the chat box and Q&A. Are there any timelines for that? Any expectations on when that will happen, and what should the DUs and ECs be prepared for in anticipation of that green energy auctions?
Okay. I think as mentioned also by in the presentation of ASEC, it's still for publication, but the secretary has already signed it. it is not yet published. That's why it's not yet in the DOE website. But maybe ASEC can also help us out on the final broad strokes of the final program that was signed. But there will be, maybe it was Dennis also who raised this point earlier. The DUs wanted greater involvement in crafting the rules for the auction itself. That's part of the exercise, because there will be specific auction rules that will be issued per auction. So the DUs will definitely be part of that process. ASEC?
Yeah, thank you, Attorney Mona. The policy was signed July 14. We're already processing the publication of such policy. Well, basically, the policy just lays down the framework for the auction. The rules that governs the auctions, as mentioned by Attorney Mona, will have to be drafted by, and that's something that we will work on with all of the DUs, especially because the DUs are the mandated participants here. The DUs will have to take these contracts as part of their the portfolio of their supply. The green energy tariff, the final name is the Green Energy Tariff Program. So it has evolved from a lot of, even the name has evolved all throughout the discussions that we've done. So the program is called Green Energy Tariff Program. This will look into the requirement of the system moving forward. No? As mentioned, we are all still compliant to the RPS rules, maybe until 2022, 2023. But beyond that, there will already be requirements from everybody. So we've looked into the total requirement of the system, and there is a provision that everybody's mandated, but there's some of the DUs can exercise their option to contract themselves for these requirements. But initially, we're looking at everybody participating in the program. We'll consolidate all of the requirements and bid it out as one single requirement. The capacity will be dispatched through the market. The capacity will be the energy will be settled through a mechanism within the market. So that's how we're looking at implementing the green energy tariff program. So that will satisfy the requirements for the RPS and the supply and demand requirement of the DUs. No? So yun yung basically the framework. Then the rules itself, we will be working on that together with all the stakeholders. Thank you.
Okay, and I think the next questions would be more on the prosumer side, and then the RE investments facilitation. There's a question on whether the remove excess capacity, excess production can just feed back to the grid, and then the 100 kilowatt limit could be behind the meter installation set up above 100 kilowatt that has curtailment devices. Can they be removed so that excess power can just be sold to the grid? That's a question. And then there's also a question that to fast track registration of RE developers, can REMB just invite all the used to be RE qualified developers and just call later those who do not comply, say 24 months. So basically, like allowing people to participate more in RE. I'm not sure if these are if Attorney Mona or ASEC has some insights on these questions.
Thanks, Marlon. Medyo choppy yung audio, at least from my end. I'm not sure if others have the same experience, but from what I gather and from what I've read in the questions, I think you're asking more about the net metering issues, right? Because what I caught from your from the audio, it's about the behind the meter. The questions posted regarding the 100 kilowatt limitation on on installations, tama ba?
Yes, attorney.
Okay. I think unless ASEC has something to add here, I think he also mentioned kasi earlier that the ERC also have the ERC also issued already the rules for this. DOE is also currently undertaking the exercise of providing the enhanced net metering rules. So there are already efforts to see how this can be structured so that we allow, the idea is already to, as I also mentioned, to recognize that there is a movement towards a prosumer sector. So that one we cannot ignore, that one we cannot stop. In fact, what we need to do is review the rules to see how we can be enablers for that sector to grow. So definitely there will be changes that need to be required. If I recall correctly lang, that question in the, I cannot find it anymore. Sorry, but I think that question was referring to whether or not when export, they will install a facility that's larger than 100 kilowatts, but there will be a mechanism to limit the export. I think if I recall the question correctly, I think that's something that technology can, it depends on whether that technology is available and that can be addressed. But maybe we can ask from the DUs also in the room, maybe GM Rene or Dennis, to comment on that, because I don't know how that affects the DUs or the electric co-op system. Whether if that kind of technology is in place, how will the DUs, or is there an adjustment, an upgrade that the DU needs to make in their own system, just in order to accommodate those types of facilities? Or maybe if ASEC, kasi si ASEC naman is an engineer. I'm not in the position to reply, but it would be good to know if there are consequences for installing these types of facilities. Maybe Dennis or GM Rene. Ayan, GM, kayo na lang po. Apo.
Your microphone is muted po.
Attorney, I missed out that question. Ano nga ba yun?
I think the question from one of the audience participants is whether if they install behind the meter more than 100 kilowatt facility, solar for example or whatever, but if they will have a mechanism to limit their export. I'm not familiar if that is available or how that can
curtailment device.
Yeah.
Curtailment device, yes. Because I was looking for the question kanina. Apo,
Yes.
GM.
Actually, if you're going to follow the rules, net metering is just a maximum of 100 kilowatt. So technically, it is feasible if you can install more than 100 kilowatt capacity and just export 100 kilowatt. That is technically feasible. It is, the evolution of the power industry is very, it's very exciting today. You can even install more than 100, let's say 500 kilowatt, but the 100 kilowatt can only qualify for the net metering. So you consume the rest. Or if you want that to export, so you're no longer covered by the net metering if you're going to export more than 100. So you have to apply for as a regular generator.
Yeah.
So I think that is the rule of the department and the ARC. That's my understanding, Attorney.
Yeah, but if there's a facility installed like that, will there be required additional technical adjustments from the DU, or it's like any other net metering applicant?
Well, if you're going to export just based on the framework of the net metering, I think the DU will allow you just with minimal modification on the, let's say for the distribution lines, something like that, or the transformers in the system. So because the export is limited to the capacity of the distribution, the distribution system in the area. Like say, for example, if it is a three-phase line, so you need to install additional capacity of transformers or additional units of transformer just to accommodate that 100 kilowatt net metered supply. I think that's that's the technical answer for that.
Yeah, and I think we can devote as the net metering policy is also evolving, Attorney Mona, we could devote a next webinar specifically for this, as there are developments as well for the enhanced net metering, maybe.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, because there are
What do you think?
a lot of questions related to net metering also. But I think Asek Red wanted to say something also in response to the earlier question. Asek?
Yeah, I think speaking for the DUs, it's not just the technical. It's not the concern is not just technical in nature. When we see installations such as this injecting into the system, that's why I mentioned earlier. It's very important for the detection is key because these cost consumers will not tell the DUs in most cases, especially if it's above 100 kilowatts because it's not covered by any rules. The first issue is on detection. Now we're really looking into improving the policy to be able to first to detect. Second is if we know that they're coming in, there has to be a very strong compliance on distribution impact studies. Because without the study, we will not be able to identify the impact that it will have on the DU. And what improvements the DU needs to do to be able to accommodate the entry of these facilities. That's on one hand. On the other hand, there's issue on commercial side. The problem is that the DUs are mandated by law to procure the supply for their captive customers. If your captive customers are already supplied by the DU, what I'm trying to say is you've already contracted supply for that specific customer, and that specific customer opts to install a facility within its own system. It has an impact to the other consumers because now the other consumers will have to subsidize the stranded capacities that are not or that are no longer delivered to some of the consumers who opted to avail of installing some of these distributed energy resources. So again, I go back to how are we able to plan out the system, the distribution development plan, and consider the power supply procurement plan, because this will come in and this will have this will get into the system, no? So working with the LGU is also very important. The Department of Energy has already issued the LGU code because the LGU issues permits, electrical permits. They issue all of this for developments within not just residential areas, but the commercial establishments and industrial establishments. So at least the detection can come from that. The detection can also come from the DU. Of course, if you've already noticed some drop in the demand, then maybe there's already an installation within the system of the consumer. Then we can call on other rules like COC rules, as mentioned earlier. So these are the things, no? But some DUs have all actually benefited from some installations as well, because without the rules, the export will be free. It becomes free to the DU as long as it does not disrupt the reliability. It does not disrupt the technical things that we need to consider to be able to have a reliable system, even with all of this in place. So we welcome all of this because these concerns actually are the things that we know for a very long time, but we really need to find solution to them because we cannot stop the entry of all of these new technologies. We have to find that balance, and we need, at the end of the day, we need to keep everybody whole. So that's really the thing that's the challenge before us. And I welcome if we're thinking of another webinars focusing on net metering, because that's something that we can really explore even further. Thank you.
Thanks for the points, great points, Aztec Red. Reliability, affordability, and dependability are the three sides of the triangle that really needs to be balanced. But there's an interesting point, and I'd like Sarah as well to chime in from Avril de Torres. Jumping off from the points of has exposed consumers to higher electricity costs because of how contracts have been structured. Does the DOE agree that this pandemic highlights the problem of like inflexible coal power? If yes, shouldn't the DOE push for renegotiation of these contracts, or at the very least ensure strict implementation of force majeure provisions in times like this? Interesting question, and I would like to hear from Sarah for additional context on this question as well. I know we're running out of time, so we would like to make this as succinct and but impactful as possible.
Yeah, that sounds good, Marlon. So I'll make a quick comment because we are short on time. So I guess generally what I'm seeing from these presentations is that there are all of these renewable energy programs coming through, and I think we need to reflect back as to why they exist. And they exist because we need a reliable and more cost-effective system. And the legacy regulatory incentives, the legacy market didn't actually provide this. Where we have incredibly high prices, we have 2.4 million people without access to power, and then we have millions more without access to reliable power. So that's one point. The other side of it is that we saw with this crisis that the way the tariffs are structured, it does end up hurting the cooperatives and thus their consumers because of this minimum requirement, this capex that needs to be paid back. And luckily, Meralco is actually able to enforce the force majeure because it is a large utility company. The smaller electric cooperatives don't necessarily have that that negotiating power the way Meralco does. And so we need to ensure that these new PSAs that come through allow that negotiating power to share the risk between the generator, the end user, and the utility company. So that's something that we've learned as well. The other thing we've learned is that we see our legacy regulatory incentives, specifically if we're looking at the NPC SPUG, the UCME, how that's used. That's used right now for recurring operational expenses for diesel fuel, and there's no exit strategy there. So that's obviously unsustainable. So what should happen instead is the UCME subsidy could be redirected for capital expenses, and this can be a one and done capital expense. So it can be for renewables, it can be for storage, it can be for whatever it is the distribution utility deems as cost effective for their area, given their resources and given their demand profile. The other thing we need to note is that we're seeing these behind the meter installations, and they're just popping up left and right. And the reason they're popping up is because consumers want lower cost power, and we need to ensure that the ECs are well equipped to deliver that. And that also means that they need access to financing, they need access to patient capital, they also need better access to this UCME subsidy for those capex expenditures. So I think this is some things that we've learned. And just going back to the question on the force majeure clauses, we certainly need to ensure that electric cooperatives are able to negotiate considering their size with the generators. Yes.
And Atty, Red, do you have any thoughts or responses to to the question and to the insights shared by Sarah?
Yeah, Marlon, it's kind of choppy, Dojo, but if I picked it up clearly, just based on what Sarah mentioned, during the quarantine period, it was really emphasized, no? Especially the contracts, how the contracts were crafted before. Some of the contracts didn't even have that clause on how you can that you can exercise given the situation. So, but some of the DUs have already exercised force majeure provisions of the contracts. But then again, that's a contractual arrangement between two parties, and what we've really emphasized, or what we've been encouraging is to renegotiate. And I agree with the point of having that avenue really to have the chance to renegotiate some of the contracts. But the generators as well have their own operating expenses. They have their own obligations as well that they need to comply or to satisfy. So it's going to be very hard to sacrifice one sector for the other. The challenge has been really to find that balance, but at the end of the day, protecting the consumers, because the flow really comes from the consumers. Without anything from the consumers, everybody going up the supply chain will have all of these issues, especially in maintaining their operations. On the issue on the UCME, yes, it's agreed that the UCME, well, it's there to really promote electrification in rural areas, in missionary areas. Traditionally, it has been there to supply subsidy for power sources that are not really cost effective and cost efficient. So what we're doing now is try to rationalize the use of these UCME to be able to divert it towards having more resilient and more cost-effective supply especially in the off-grid areas. And having that UCME as a driver, or as something that the off-grid area can rely upon, not just by utilizing it to some of the diesel engines and subsidize their operation, but actually look into how we can incentivize the entry of more renewable energy sources, more reliable and stable indigenous source of power in these areas. So we're currently looking into really rationalizing the utilization of the UCM. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashik Red. While Marlon is fixing some audio situation, I'm just gonna wrap up this event. My name is Ivan, a colleague of Marlon also in the CEIA. And thank you so much, everybody, especially the 170 plus people who are still on board this webinar. We would like to thank you also for our speakers for the time and the knowledge that we gained from them. And we will definitely, as much as we want to answer all your questions, we will definitely raise and relay this to the respective agencies that can answer your questions. And hopefully we can email them as soon as possible to everybody who has raised their questions. Okay, so that wrap, we want to hear more of course, also from our electric cooperatives and distribution utilities in the audience, and know how we can further support you in meeting your RPS compliance targets. Kindly answer our post-event survey by clicking on the link, which we will send in the chat. This will lead you or redirect you to a survey that we hope that you can answer also. Again, we would like to thank our speakers and panelists for their time and providing their exceptional insights and guidance. So thank you all for joining us today in exploring the opportunities for the Philippines to transition away from our current costly power system into a system that is more resilient to major disruptions and able to provide affordable, modern energy services to communities across the country while addressing long-term sustainability and climate goals. So if you wish to contact us and continue the conversation, we will be reaching out to you through our email, and you can also contact the rest of the team that the emails will be provided to you. So again, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in future webinars. So everyone, thank you and have a happy lunch.
Thank you. Salamat
Thank
po.
you very much.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ASEC. Thank you, Attorney Mona.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, GM Rene, and thank you, Sir Dennis, and thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.